the Indian space program took one small step, which in a way is a giant leap for the commercial space market for India and the world. Skyroot Private Limited launched their first sounding rocket. It was a sounding rocket and not a launch vehicle. But it was one big step in India's space program. Almost 59 years after the program started, a private space agency was able to launch a rocket in space. The commercial space market in India is on the verge of a liftoff. And some of that has happened thanks to the creation of a regulator and promoter and popularizer by the Indian government called InSpace. And I have with me Dr. Pawan Goenka. Namaskar. How are you, Pawan? Very well. Dr. Pawan Goenka is the chairman of InSpace, a successful techno businessman before he joined trying to make India's commercial space market a success. He has been with Mahindra and Mahindra. So a lot of the vehicles we see are thanks to him. Now he's trying his hand to make launch vehicles successful, satellite successful, and also the downstream processing of data from space. Thanks a lot, Dr. Goenka. Always a pleasure speaking to you.
Very nice to see you.
And congratulations to InSpace, Skyroot, and to the Indian Space Research Organization on a fabulous mission for Skyroot called Praram. What does the Praram mission by Skyroot mean for India and the world?
Well, as you said, Pallavji, that this is a small step because it's after all a sounding rocket. But it means a lot to many different stakeholders. Let me first start with the Skyroot itself. For Skyroot, by demonstrating that they are able to do the first private sector sounding rocket that went as high up as 90 kilometers, they are now ready to go the next step of having an orbital vehicle, which will be about 21 meter long and can carry about 300 kilograms. And they expect to launch it in about a year's time. So this increases the confidence in themselves for Skyroot and confidence of others around them. So that's a very big step for the companies. But more than that, I think what it means for the confidence and motivation of the Indian private sector in space, and also the investors, not forget the investors, is also very important, because now everybody can see two, three things. They can see that the government is very serious about the space reform, what they announced in June 2020, because seeing is believing. And when they see the kind of support that is coming through in space, through ISRO, the confidence goes up. So that's one very important. Second thing, they can clearly see that ISRO is all out to help them, the private sector. And frankly, there were some non-believers that said that will happen or not. And Skyroot launches over that ISRO engineers are as excited about helping the private sector as they are about their own launch. So that's a very important thing. And third, as I said, the investors themselves getting confidence, because the startups require a lot of funding, because space is not a child's game. It's going to be a long decision period before they start seeing their money. So from all viewpoints, I think this is the fabulous beginning, if I could call it, of the private sector's entry into Indian space.
What about for the world?
For the world, what it means is that in a sense we are creating a new opportunity for where the world can come to for the space requirements. In terms of launches, so far we have not proven private sector's ability for making satellites. That's around the corner, I think, will happen. And then later on downstream applications, because I think finally where India will really excel is in downstream applications, because of its very strong IT power that it has and the overall understanding of digital systems.
Now, is this the tipping point in India's space journey? Because till now it was government owned, government funded. To now you have at least private organizations looking at it very seriously. And I like the age group of the people who are doing this new space business for India. So is this a tipping point?
Well, I would say that it certainly is a very important milestone that we have created. And you know it very well that it's going to take tremendous effort even from here on before we can make commercial success out of space. Even for Skyroot, they still have to work for 1 full year before they can launch their first orbital vehicle. Once that happens, then I think we are at a tipping point. Or when Agnikul launches their orbital vehicle, we are at a tipping point. Or when a satellite goes up which starts sending data, which gets commercially exploited, it is tipping point. So I would say it's a very good beginning, a very big leap, but I will still wait before I say the tipping point is arrived.
Now, like you rightly said, it was a sounding rocket. It was unguided, uncontrolled, essentially a spinning rocket sent into space and brought back to Earth. Did it need so much hype as it happened around this launch?
I think the important point is that it is the first time private sector has done this in India. For ISRO, what you have just described is a routine thing. But the private sector to have achieved that on their own is a very big point. But the intangibles are as important, or maybe even more important, the tangibles that I pointed out earlier. The confidence it brings in Skyroot, the confidence it brings in other startups, the confidence it brings in investors. I think those are all the things that are going to feed into the entry of private sector into space.
More than that, let me say, somebody who's observed the space program, and we are in a conversation, that's why I can also say about, I think it gives the confidence to many Indians that India is serious about letting non-government enterprises and non-government entities into this ethereal domain of space.
Absolutely.
And I think that was a very fundamental shift which we have seen, and I would not hesitate to call it a seismic shift in 59 years of watching the Indian space program. Now, Dr. Goenka, how soon can we see a launch vehicle? Even Agnikul, when it is doing, we'll come to that later, but it's still going to be a kind of a sounding rocket. What we need is a controlled avionics full launch vehicle. Is that in the offing?
Yes, so Skyroot's assessment is that in about a year's time, they'll be ready with a real orbital launch vehicle, which will be, as I said earlier, 21 ton, I think 21 meter, and will be 3 stages and go in low orbit at about 500 kilometers, can carry up to 300 kilograms. So that will be the real orbital rocket, which is not very far. 1 year is not very far from now. And the important thing is that everything that they wanted to prove with the sounding rocket or suborbital vehicle has been proven. And therefore, there are no hiccups that they're going to see in terms of fundamental technologies that go into the orbital vehicle. There are 2 or 3 things they've done here which is kind of at the cutting edge of technology, is how much carbon fiber has been used. That will keep the weight low. Second is the use of 3D printing in many parts of the rocket, and those things have been proven now. The telematics have been proven, and Strack has played a very important role in it. So with all the building blocks in place, I think they can move very quickly now towards the final orbital vehicle. But as you know, a lot of work has to be done, a lot of things have to be proven, and ISRO will come to their help and open up all their facilities for them to prove their rocket.
Now, before we proceed ahead to other things, this is a private sector launch, and when InSpace was created and Prime Minister announced that, there was a provision that ISRO would be charging for the use of its facilities. So is there a license fee which has been paid, and how much is the license fee, or what is the expectation? Because this would give an idea to other startups that the bar is not very high. Maybe you can also look at launch vehicles.
So there's no license fee because nothing is licensed from ISRO in this case. What ISRO has provided are their facilities. They have done testing at Strack. They have obviously launched using the Satish Dhawan Space Center, and for that there is a charge that has been put in. This is as per the formula that is developed jointly by ISRO and InSpace. This will come out in the policy. So since it's not announced, I cannot talk about it. But the same formula has been applied for Skyroot. And Skyroot is on record to having said that ISRO charges were very nominal.
So there would be a nominal charge.
There will be. Anything free, in my belief, is not valid.
Okay, but ISRO is not going to be charging an amortized cost to them of, say, creation of Satish Dhawan Space Center, because that would be enormous for a startup to bear. So I presume that's why I called it a license fee. Is that a small number or it's a very large number?
It's a small number, as I say. It's very reasonably done, and they have a fairly evolved methodology which has been worked on. And what we have done is on top of whatever calculation which will be given to everybody. So all those will be announced once the policy is announced. In the meantime, we applied the same formula for strikes.
Now, there is an upcoming launch where you had a rocket stage which was tested. Now we have the first possibility of satellites made by the Indian private sector going up on the polar satellite launch vehicle. Tell me a little bit about the passengers.
Well, this is happening on the C-54 just a few days from now.
The PSLV
C-54 just a few days from now. And there are two private sector payloads. One is the Anand satellite of Pixel, which is more or less like what I call a commercial launch. So there was no involvement of InSpace in that. So they have done the whole work on their own, and they just brought the satellite to NSIL, and NSIL is doing it as a commercial launch. This is a very important satellite because this is about a 16 kg weight, which is supposed to be taking very high resolution photographs of Earth, and they will then create a constellation. So this is perhaps one of the most advanced satellites that is coming out from an Indian startup.
But it is a commercial NSIL launch, so InSpace is not involved.
InSpace is not involved in this. It's still commercial launch. Because satellite is designed outside India. The second one, which is completely Indian effort, designed here, developed here, InSpace has been involved, ISRO has been involved, with Thibault 1 and Thibault 2 space. These are still what I would call technology demonstration. It's a 0.5 USat technology demonstration to prove that they can store data and forward data. So Dhruv Space is going in a very systematic manner. Last time they tested their deployer. This time they are doing technology demonstration of a 0.5 CubeSat, and then they will go to bigger and bigger satellites. So these are the two payloads that are started.
You also had in the earlier launch of PSLV a certain payload which was tested. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that was in C-53 on 30th June. That was in fact the first private sector formal launch that happened. There were again two payloads from private sector. One was the Dhruv Space deployer, which is a device used to eject the satellite, the CubeSats primarily, which was again tested that it opens as desired, the springs and all that. So very successfully done. The second one was a Digantra payload, which was to measure the proton radiation, dosimeter, so to say, to understand what kind of damage could be caused by proton radiation in LEO satellites. And this was a very interesting thing. It is not just about the experiment, but also how it was conducted. For the first time, the fourth stage, which is normally wasted, was used to host this sensor, so that they didn't have to make a satellite for the sensor. And the PS4 will sort of orbit the Earth for about 6 months, and that's just about enough for them to collect all the data. So this, in a way, is first time ever that ISRO has done something like this. It will become a very good way for startups to do their experiment of payload without having to spend money for a satellite.
I have called what is called the stabilized fourth stage or the PSLV in orbit as a Swadeshi sky lab or a space lab, because essentially you're giving a platform which is stabilized, which can communicate and also be able to do experiments, future biology experiments also. So in a way, India has entered a very different orbit with that particular stabilized fourth stage. And I must also add for the viewers, and I'm sure Dr. Goenka will not be able to comment on that. That was the stage which was also used for hosting the Tiranga in space. ISRO actually put a flag of India in space using the fourth stage of the rocket, and we have pictures of that which were shared with me and then to the public. So it was a fascinating experiment, undoubtedly. Now, going beyond, we also have other startups, and we are focusing mostly on the commercial space market right now. We have Agnikul, which is knocking at the doors of Sriharikota, wanting to launch. Tell me a little bit about what, because you've given them some permissions already.
So Agnikul is in some ways similar to Skyroot, though different technology. Agnikul will be doing a fully 3D printed engine, which is the first for India at least, and therefore a little bit more complex technology. But the objective is the same: to have a small launch vehicle that can carry 200, 300, 400 kilo to Rio, and they will be launching a similar sounding rocket kind of thing, hopefully about a month from now. And once they're done that, then they will also go into the full orbital vehicle. So in a sense, Skyroot and Agnikul are running parallel. Right now, Skyroot is slightly ahead, having launched the pre-orbital vehicle, but I'm sure Agnikul engineers are working hard to catch up and go ahead. So it's good to have that competition.
Yes, but the technology they are using is different.
It's very different.
Skyroot has used solid propulsion, and Agnikul is going to be using liquid propulsion, and we have to see which one does better and how it goes forward. But we probably need all diversity in our repertoire to do this.
Yes, sir. So you know the benefits of the two technologies and complexities of two technologies. It's good to have these two. So between these two and the SSLV of ISRO, we will have 3 small launching vehicles available in India. And I think that really, in terms of commercial exploitation, will give us very potent weapon to have 3 such vehicles available. And I'm hoping that a day will come when we are launching 1 vehicle a week of one of these 3 vehicles a week. And that will be the real commercial exploitation of the hardware part of space.
Now, when we are talking of these small launchers, yes, SSLV did not succeed in its first attempt. Now we have one from Agnikul, one from Skyroot, and ISRO's own SSLV in the offing. Which is the nearest competitor for these small launchers in the global market?
Well, there are multiple companies in multiple countries working on small launchers. Okay? Some of them may be a little bit ahead of where we are today, but my feeling is that Indian offerings will be the most cost effective. And for a small launcher, that will become very important criteria, very important parameter. And given that India has proven itself, at least the ISRO rockets have proven themselves to be very reliable as the rockets go. So if you bring in reliability with low cost, I think we will have a fairly serious offering that the world will have to look at. And what my desire will be that the world will come to India for all applications of small. And there are many more beyond Skyroot and Agnikul in India that are working on it, but they are still somewhat behind.
Now, let me press you a little bit on this, because see, if small launchers carrying single satellites of 300, 400, 500 kg were a lucrative market, I'm sure the Twitter boss, Elon Musk, would not have overlooked that market. Soviets would not have overlooked the market. The American startups would not have overlooked the market. How is it that the Indian commercial space is kind of focusing on this single satellite, single launch as a big venture, a possible venture?
It's not just Indian. As I said, that there are many other companies outside India in many countries are working on similar offerings. It's not just Indian. Maybe the technology has evolved, that it just come out recently, and only in the last 3 or 5 years what has started on these things. Maybe the requirement of the LEO launches, which now is increasing in sort of acceptance, is making these satellites or these launch vehicles more desirable. Because obviously if you were launching earlier the 2 ton, 3 ton, 4 ton, then these vehicles are useless. Now why Elon Musk didn't get into it or not getting into it, or why Russia is not getting into it, I don't know that. But from whatever little that I have seen in the past 1 year, I think there is a great opportunity for the small launch vehicles to become the mainstream of launches. right? Because of it being cost effective. More importantly, the vehicle can be ready in 2 weeks.
A quick turnaround.
Quick turnaround. Today, if you want to order something, you will be told, come back after 2.5 years, we'll have the vehicle ready for you. And obviously, in the current fast-moving world, you don't plan 2.5 years in advance what you want. So that also, I think, is a very big benefit. So I am very optimistic that small launch vehicles will become the order of the day, and that India will have a lead role.
Now, do you have any inkling how soon will we have the second launch of the small satellite launch vehicle that ISRO? Because the heritage of ISRO is what is very attractive to people.
Very soon. It could be in December, it could be in January, and that is the D2. So there are 3 developmental launches planned. D1, D2, D3. D1, as you said, was not very successful, and D2 will happen around the corner. And then after that, once the D3 is done, then we're ready.
But let me now shift gears and ask you, when you joined InSpace and when InSpace was created, there were apprehensions, and you were also considered an interloper in the business of space, because having mastered what runs on gravity on Earth on 4 wheels, is suddenly you're looking at wheel-less technology and rockets and satellites. How's the journey been for you at InSpace, and are you getting enough support from ISRO?
First of all, let me say that it's been a remarkably enjoyable journey for me.
I'm happy to hear that.
I never thought that I will go from 40 years of automotive to a new sector and enjoy doing it. See, I was never meant to become a rocket scientist in this country, and I'm not, by any stretch of imagination. I know enough terms now about rockets and satellites and payloads that I can do this interview. But if you ask me to design even a CubeSat, I would throw up my hands, right? And that was not the part of the job. The role was to be able to interface with the scientists, with the technologists, with the business people, entrepreneurs, investors, and bring it all together, so connect the dots to make the private sector succeed. So there, the most important enabler for the role is ISRO's approach to private sector, and I can tell you without any hesitation that ISRO couldn't have done any more for everything that we are doing. This Skyroot is just one visible example, but there are many things in the pipeline right now where ISRO engineers and scientists and management is 100% behind it. Of course, they are also learning on how to support outside work. We are also learning on how to connect the dots. But I think Skyroot also, in a way, was a demonstration of this three-legged stool of InSpace, the private company, and ISRO working together to make a success. Right? That also worked out very well. What I'm very happy to see is constant encouragement from the Honorable Prime Minister. I think it's not just one cements in space and then moved on to something else. The space is always on top of his mind. Twice he has talked about in Nike Apache in the last 3-4 months. And therefore that support also is very important for InSpace. And the team that we have got, which are up to now mostly people coming from ISRO, for them also it's mindset change. Because so far they were working for themselves, and now they are working to help others succeed. And it's a mindset change. And I told the team from the day one, it is a very different topic. And I'm so happy to see that when we launched the Skyroot, every team member thought that it's their rocket that has been launched and not somebody else's rocket. So I think everything is coming together in place. The experiment of InSpace seems to be succeeding. Again, very long journey, we are starting, and these 2 or 3 projects that have happened are the first demonstration of success of what InSpace is trying to do.
Well, I must add here, like I said, there were apprehensions, and now I can say at least in this journey of more than a year or a year and a half of InSpace and ISRO, and let's not bring in the private sector, I think you played the role of a catalyst and a role of what can be called the cryogenic engine, which is to push it into escape velocity and then it can move forward. I think the experience which you brought in, having headed a private R&D sector, is playing out beautifully in this whole business. How much difference did it make that Dr. Jiten Singh, the Minister who looks after space and also is the minister in the Prime Minister's office, was personally present at Sriharikota to watch the sky route launch.
I think this was very encouraging again for all stakeholders, not just for Skyroot, but for ISRO, but for in space, to see that the Honorable Minister himself spent almost 2 days devoting travel time for this event, and spoke very passionately in the press conference and also in the internal announcement. And I think in all of these things, the visible demonstration of support from the highest office is very important, because that gives confidence that I will not suddenly be dropped. Because this is not a one-day journey or 1 week journey or 1 month journey. It's a long journey. And suddenly if you see the government has now turned and gone some other direction, then I will be left high and dry. So this constant, the Honorable PM talking about it in his speeches, in Nike Apache, the pushing coming for the launch, and also the interactions that he had with us, the constant follow-up of on what is happening. All of these things are create confidence.
Dr. Goenka, you were speaking of long-term approaches to space, and that's the only way one can succeed. In a long-term approach, there are several aspects which are right now missing in the whole big canvas. One expects a space policy to be in place. What is the status of the space policy? Earlier, when Dr. Sivan was there, we were disjointed, broken policies for separate sectors. There was an omnibus policy which has been made. What is the status of that?
Well, I think it's a very important decision made by Space Commission that rather than having 7-8 different policies, let's make one common policy. It will be easier to understand, and you are not referring to 200 pages, you're referring to only 10 pages. As a result of that, we had to kind of go back on the drawing board and redraft everything to fit one policy, which has been done. It has gone through consultation. And now I think it's on the final leg of sort of signing on the dotted line. Again, I don't want to say whether it's 2 weeks or 2 months, but everything is done. The policy has come out quite well, I think, and almost every desire of the private sector has been included favorably in the policy. So, though a little late from what the expectation was, but I think the private sector will be very happy to see what they see in the policy that come out.
You've been in the private sector, now you're part of InSpace as chairman. Are you happy with the policy the way it is at the last stage of the draft? And I know when it goes to the cabinet takes its own time for clearing policies, and we can never prejudge when it will come. But with the Prime Minister himself putting his might behind the space program, are you personally happy with the policy which is there in front of you?
I'm very happy with the policy because it is a very balanced policy, allowing private sector to play a full sort of role in the space sector, at the same time ensuring that things don't go out of control. Because space is an area where one has to be a little careful for it not to go out of control. But probably what I would say, more than the policy itself, what I was pleasantly surprised with is the process that goes behind making the policy, which from outside I didn't have access to the process, right? That is not visible to us. And what I like is that those who are working on the policy take all inputs that come in from everyone very seriously. Everything is recorded. Whatever is not accepted, there is a reason given internally, and therefore policy is, and that's the reason it takes some time because there are many stakeholders who have different views on it. And I'm very impressed with the process that gets followed. I'm sure the same thing happens for the policy.
What about the next stage? Normally preceding a policy there is an act, a space law or a space act. We still don't have any of that in place. Is there something in the offing? Because there was a draft space activities bill, which if you ask me was a pitiable piece of document which needed to be trashed and thrown into the dustbin, if I can say, and I'm being very blunt here, and I'm told that is what has been done to it. So when is the new act or the space law coming in?
Pallavi, somebody was listening to you, and it has been trashed and thrown in the dustbin, as you said, and completely new. SpaceX has been drafted now. But as you know, acts take time. It has to go through Parliament. So right now it's in the consultation process and it will take some time. But not having the act will not come in the way of the policy getting implemented for two reasons. Because the in-space has already been created by an action or by an act of cabinet. And what the act will do is make in-space a parliamentary body rather than a cabinet action body. So that therefore it won't come in the way. The second thing that is very important coming from the act is the liability, which is not part of the policy; it's part of the act, right? And what has been done now is that an interim liability policy will be authorized by the Space Commission. In fact, it's going to Space Commission in the next meeting. And the same thing has already been applied for STRIDE as a special approval, whatever has been put in as a recommendation. And once that is approved, I think all aspects of what will be in the Act, that is a regulator getting established and having powers to authorize things and having the liability framework in place will be done. So Act will happen, but you're right that it should happen before policy, but it won't come in the way of implementing the policy.
Yeah, let me spend a minute or so on the liability aspect, because both the Skyroot sounding rocket and the Agnikul sounding rocket are essentially options where you are throwing something in the sky and bringing it back, and there is limited regime of liability because they are not going into orbit. So will we see the full liability regime in place the moment somebody wants to put a launcher which is sending satellites into orbit?
So again, I don't want to talk about what is being sort of forwarded to Space Commission approval until it is approved. But what we have done is spend significant amount of effort and time to understand what will be paid. We have reviewed each and every country, major country, and to what their liability policy is. India doesn't have one right now. And on that basis, we have made our liability policy. And our liability policy, I think, will be near the best or better than the best from the industry's view. And at least with the Skyroot, the amount of money they had to spend for the insurance of liability that was required was insignificant in the overall scheme.
Now, what about highboard? Because see, that is an orbiting mission, and orbiting missions have different connotations because international treaties come into play. How is liability going to play out there?
Okay, so what we have done is we didn't want any activity to slow down for lack of policy being formally announced or for lack of liability framework being formally in place. So we had taken a special approval for few launches where the Space Commission said, okay, the framework, go ahead and do it. So highboard, frankly, we are not even asking for.
Okay, so that means
but that's an exception right now because we don't have a liability framework. Once the liability framework is out,
so essentially the same framework where the government of India takes the liability on itself.
for highboard one.
Now, how is the startup ecosystem looking now, and how is it faring, and will they get enough?
Well, see, last 12 months has seen a significant ramp up from all angles. So first of all, number of space startups that are registered as space startups has gone up from about maybe 30, 35 to 100 plus, right? And almost every week or every 2 weeks a new startup is coming up in this space arena. So that's a very good news. And many of them, I won't say all of them have some serious plans, but many of them have fairly good and unique outfit that they are planning. The second thing that is happening is very important is the investor interest. In the 11 months of this calendar year, we have seen $110 million of investment already happen, which is more than double of what has happened cumulatively up to that point. And I think this Skyroot launch will only accelerate that process of investment coming in. So both in terms of interest from the young startups and the interest from the investors, things are looking up quite.
Now, right now, the investors who are putting in money are wanting some kind of a stamp to work alongside the Indian Space Research Organization, which is really a darling of India, and everybody wants to some way associate with them. Do you see serious investment coming the way of these private sector companies, other than this kind of darling investors?
I don't know what you mean by serious investment, but let's say if you were to take an example of PSLV, where a consortium will be manufacturing 5 PSLV. I'm sure these companies are investing serious amount of money to prepare for that manufacturing of PSLV. When we start looking at technology transfer or license transfer for let's say SSL in future, or some buses IMS1, IMS2, some serious money will be put in by larger companies, not by startups, by larger established companies into bringing these space objects into reality. So while we talk about the startups, because that's what everybody wants to talk about, there is significant interest in established companies to move up from being vendors to playing a role in space technology. And that investment, frankly, cumulatively, maybe even more than what you would see from the startups.
Now, there was recently this report by the Indian Space Association and EY, and they gave numbers which many say don't seem to fit the arithmetic, and the numbers which they gave seems very massive, $9.6 billion and 2.6% and 0.5% of GDP, etc. As somebody who's come from the private sector and is chairman of InSpace, how robust is the estimations by the EY report and ISPA report?
Well, I've been hearing numbers behind when I say $7 to $10 billion of Indian assets. Frankly, I have not seen the math of where that $7 to $10 billion comes from. I've taken it as given. But what we are doing is that we are commissioning a study in space and ISRO working together to get into deeply understanding what the current space economy is, understanding what our ambitions should be, and understanding, more importantly, it's easy to say we'll go from 8 to 40, but how? What will take us from 8 to 40? So to define that, and then in space would work with the private sector to kind of nudge private sector to get into those areas where we see great potential.
So, exciting times for space?
Absolutely exciting times for space.
So do I see a young Dr. Pawan Goenka who went to US and was working there in an R&D company with the same kind of energy, giving India a space economy which we should be proud of, and a space ecosystem?
I'll let you be the judge for that. I cannot say anything.
But personally, are you putting in more time and effort through your wise career which you had behind you, long career, and do you think the space ecosystem in India would be thriving soon?
I think the space ecosystem in India will be thriving. That I have no doubt about. And clearly I am doing whatever I think I can do. Again, as I said earlier, I am not a rocket scientist. I will not become a rocket scientist. But I'm just learning enough to be able to talk with rocket scientists.
So that was Dr. Pawan Goenka, chairman of InSpace, the regulator and promoter for space activities in India. A very difficult job for him because he is balancing between the actual private sector, which is right now full of startups, and the large companies like Larsen & Toubro, Godrej and Walchandnagar, and the heritage Indian Space Research Organization, which has given India such a boost in space. Is this the starting point for looking at a grand ecosystem being developed in India around space? Will we see space parks all over the place? I think only time would tell. But a prarambh, or the beginning, has been made through the sounding rocket launch by Skyroot, and other startups are looking to emulate some of that success. and a lot rests on the very able but thin shoulders of Dr. Pawan Goenka. Always a delight speaking to you, Dr. Goenka. You have transformed from being an automobile engineer, and you don't call yourself a rocket scientist, but very soon you will be looked upon as somebody who's gone and made a tipping point for India. You yourself did not want to talk of a tipping point, but I'm sure the government and the private sector looks up to you for able guidance in times to come. So this was a detailed look at how the Indian space ecosystem would be looking like in times to come. Very exciting times. Skyroot launches a rocket motor, satellites coming very soon, and then a consortium going ahead to build the polar satellite launch vehicle. And don't forget, the big mission Gaganyaan also coming up. Exciting times for the Indian space ecosystem. I'm very happy to be part of it, and listening to Dr. Goenka always excites me and excites our viewers. Thanks a lot. In Faridabad, Pallav Bagla.